Welcome to Citizens Insight, the Citizens Party's interview series on matters of national and international importance. Today, the coward banks are crushing cash and competitors. And our guest today is Paul Thomas, the owner of a cash and transit company called Commander Security. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Robbie, for having me.
No, very glad to have you. This is going to be an important discussion today because you've had an experience that too many people are having in Australia, and it goes to the heart of the abuse of power by the big banks. 2 years after the Banking Royal Commission, it may as well not have happened. So Paul, let's just talk a bit about yourself to introduce you to the viewer. You're a cash and transit business. Pretend I know nothing. What does that mean?
Sure. Well, I class myself as a boutique style service where I go a bit above and beyond what that of our competitors do. We provide same day banking services to customers where we'll pick up their banking requirements from their premises and deliver it on their behalf to their nominated bank of choice or the bank that they deal with. And we also provide a change service. We do ATM replenishment services, change supply, even down to the point of val cargo movements. And even we do a bit of pharmaceutical movements of Schedule 4 and Schedule 8 pharmaceutical products.
Okay, so you have all the security equipment, transportation, etc., and you provide that. You're a smaller version of Armour Guard and those sort of businesses, right?
That's correct. I'm a smaller version of Armour Guard, family owned, operated. That goes a bit above and beyond that of our competitors, where we offer that little more personalised service.
That's the way someone like you gets to compete with those bigger players. So, Paul, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you met the Citizens Party when we were having our fight on the cash ban in 2019, or maybe a bit before, on the question of bail-in. And of course, you got involved in that campaign, didn't you?
Yes. I first came to light of the Citizens Party back in the days when the cash ban was first introduced, because like that was something that was going to affect our industry. And of course, out of everyone in the cash and transit industry, I never really saw anyone take up aim or fight. I felt running solo as a cash and transit operator here in Australia, trying to fight that bill alongside you guys at the Citizens Party. Well,
and can we say, after 18 months of fight with the support of people like yourself, we won. Just to remind people, December last year, the cash ban, $10,000 cash ban law was dropped from Parliament. But not before there was a big fight. Now, we're going to talk about what's happened to you, which is you have been debanked. But before we talk about your case, you were bringing to us this question of debanking because it was happening to your customers. And before we get into the specifics of that, I want to play a clip. Now, this was part of the cash ban fight. This is from the December 2019 Senate Economics Legislation Committee hearing into the cash ban law. And the Small Business Ombudsman's Office was testifying. And I want to play this little 2-minute clip where they raise out of the blue that there's this phenomenon happening to businesses. So just watch this.
But we're coming across a number of situations where banks are actually removing people from their books. So we call it debanking. So, for example,
you call it, sorry, what?
Debanking.
Debanking.
So not offering services.
Sure.
So this could be your point of sale equipment, but it can also be even holding an account with the bank. And it's happening across a number of industries where we've seen. Some of it's news agents, some of it is adult services, and other industries as well. So we've seen examples of people associated with tattoo parlours or gun shops also being debanked as well.
So for social conscience reasons, you're saying? Or?
We are having trouble fathoming exactly for what reason, Senator. So
okay.
Why you would try to actually debank legitimate businesses.
So in that respect, it would be quite legitimate for businesses to try and debank banks because they certainly have an awful track record. And the government is in effect forcing people to use these very entities that engage in abhorrent commercial conduct.
I think the key here, Senator, is that if a bank refuses to deal with a particular business and the business needs to make transactions of over $10,000, requiring a business to deal with an entity that won't deal with them puts that business in an impossible position.
Okay, I see your point. That's a very good point. Okay.
Okay, so that's an explanation of debanking, and as you saw, Senator Patrick is rather surprised and makes the obvious point that if the banks are using moral reasons to debank businesses that are on the fringes of morality, like sex shops, adult stores, but also, as the small business guy says, also news agents, etc. Rex Patrick says, well, if the banks are using those reasons, then businesses should be able to debank the banks because they're the ones that have shown that their behaviour has been the worst. But Paul, it struck me that the small business ombudsman official there says that they don't know really why the banks are doing this. Because from our conversations with you at that time and with other people, you were bringing up to us examples of debanking that seem to be exclusively happening in the area of the financial system that's an alternative to the banks, namely the cash area, gold and silver bullion dealers, Bitcoin traders, anything that are alternatives to the banks. And in your case, you were noticing it happening in a section of your customers that are remittance companies. So explain how they work and what was happening to them.
Okay, so a majority of our customers are remittance companies where they'll take money from families who are living here in Australia that want to send money back overseas to support families and relatives that need assistance overseas. What we've noticed and it's been happening, I'm told, since 2013 progressively, where remittance companies have one by one been having their accounts knocked off and closed by each one of the larger banks. Now, these remittance companies were all with the 4 major banks that we know of. So then they subsequently moved to the smaller banks and the credit unions, and they're all now following the same suit to the point now I have a customer that can't get a bank account and is literally having to close her business.
See, last year, at the end of last year, the ABC did a story on this, and they pointed out, and I think one of the cases they pointed out was one of your customers, but a country like Lebanon, people might be surprised to find out, relies on something like on cash remittances from overseas for something like 30% of its national income. It's an extraordinary amount of money. So this is actually a big deal. Immigrants work hard in a country like Australia because they're supporting their family here and their families back home. But for some reason, I find this surprising, but you may have an explanation. The banks actually provide remittance services as well, but these smaller remittance companies are just better at it. They do it quicker, right?
They do. They're a much quicker turnaround. Like, for example, funnily enough, it was Westpac. I was in the queue waiting to do some banking for one of my clients at Westpac branch, and it was just before Christmas, and a lady walked in and wanting to deposit or send some cash overseas, and the response from the teller was, sorry, we can't do that now. We can't guarantee anything. You'll need to use a remittance company. So, and then they turned to me because they know that I service remittance companies and asked, who would you recommend?
Hey,
and ironically enough, it's like, well, yeah, you don't want to do remittance, but you want to wipe out remittance. But how are these families that want to get money back in a legitimate sense to their families overseas supposed to do that?
well, and of course, in this particular area, the official concern is the anti-money laundering counter-terrorism financing law, AML-CTF, that cash is used for. We know I mean, it's a ridiculous thing to observe. It's like saying the sun comes up in the morning. Yes, cash is used in crimes, but so is everything else used in crimes. But because the big banks have got in trouble in this area because of their own failings, they have used that as an excuse to target these kind of companies they say are higher risk. Yet you know, right, Paul, that these companies, your customers, they're in full, unlike the banks, they're in full compliance with the AML-CTF laws.
Yes, correct. Every one of our customers goes through the stringent process that AUSTRAC put them through in order to become compliant. They have to have their yearly audits. They have to have legal representation to go through the audit process and signed off, and then they get their compliance certificates. Yet they're still being targeted, and the banks are not acknowledging that the fact that they're AUSTRAC compliant. I think it's more the fact that banks are nervous about where the money's going to end up once it's in international waters, so to speak. And that's the reason why they're targeting these remittance companies.
Well, that's the excuse they use, and one of the other regulations that's sort of the more common one people might be aware of is that you disclose any amount over $10,000, and that's standard practice. And that of course is what the banks weren't doing with their own bookkeeping, right? But all these companies have been doing that. So we've seen that happening in a big way. Remittance companies are effectively being targeted and wiped out, and that's a real problem for the communities that rely on them. We may talk about some other cases in a second, but let's talk about your case now, because you've gone on an incredible journey here in the last few months. So as someone who was involved in campaigning to save the cash system and in blowing the whistle on debanking, suddenly you found yourself debanked by Westpac last year. How did it happen?
I honestly don't know. I never in a million years thought I would be in the position that I am today, given the associations and the relationship that I had with Westpac and meetings I had with senior officials at Westpac to discuss opportunities of a commercial wholesale arrangement that Westpac have gone out different to all the other banks and offering to smaller security companies like ourselves. It appears they've just gone out, picked and chosen who they wanted to use, and everyone else is, no, sorry, that service is no longer being offered, etc. And yeah, it was October. I never forget the date. It was October 14 when I got the correspondence in the post saying that first it was my business accounts all being closed. And
how much notice did they give you?
By the time I got the letter, it was just under 2 weeks.
Yep.
And it's really not enough. Like, mind you, it took 10 days for the letter to get to me.
Yeah.
And then I didn't know what was going on. It threw me into a turmoil. I was about to go away for a week. So I spent a holiday in panic-stricken mode, trying to work out how am I going to operate my business? How am I going to keep trading? What am I going to do? Because Westpac was the unique provider away from the other 3 banks that were offering the different types of services.
What excuse did they give you?
They reserved the right under their terms and conditions to no longer offer financial services. But in my particular case, the reason they've given is we reserve the right to withdraw financial services for reasons of unsatisfactory conduct or any other matter we deem appropriate. Which is,
that's a license to do what they want. A clause like that, of course.
That's pretty much the case, and we've challenged them on the unsatisfactory conduct, and to date, they've not come back to us with one iota of information or response.
And wasn't it true that the people at Westpac you're dealing with and used to dealing with had no explanation for this, and they could only refer to some unnameable entity in the organisation making these decisions?
That's correct. It was termed to me, they're the faceless division.
Faceless division.
The faceless division is the one that's responsible for what's occurring to me, or the debanking process, or withdrawing financial services to customers.
So initially, Paul, you were told it was your business account, and then it went further.
It did. For about 4 weeks later, like in the meantime, I wrote quite a lengthy letter, a 5-page letter to the CEO, Peter King of Westpac, and subsequently copied all the board members in as well. Sent them off all individually by registered post. Never once got a response. Then 4 weeks later, they hit me starting with my personal accounts. And when I say personal accounts, it's my mortgage, which is jointly owned between my sister and I for a property that we live at. Joint account between my partner and I, my personal accounts, my credit cards, my life insurance, my income protection, and my superannuation, all targeted for closure.
Now, that when you told me that, I remember being floored, but not totally surprised, because what we'd already picked up in this area of debanking is that the banks, there's two aspects to how far the banks are willing to go, and we likened it to the mafia, where they don't just kill you, they kill your family, they kill your dogs and your pets, etc. Because I know another case here in Melbourne where the gentleman who has a bullion company, Michael Kukulka, the banks debanked him, they debanked his business, they debanked his personal accounts, credit cards, etc. All the same. They debanked his parents because they were associated with him, and they debanked his employees. And you're like, why are the banks prepared to do this? And then the other aspect of it is he got put on some kind of a list where he wasn't just debanked by one bank, he was debanked by all banks. And in order for his business to survive, he's had to keep going through lists of banks to see who else he could get to actually provide him banking services, because you cannot, can you actually function in the modern economy without a bank account? And
you can't.
No, you actually absolutely can't. So this kind of behaviour by the banks is just appalling, targeting someone like yourself. And what was the impact? Tell us a little bit about the toll it had on you, being subjected to this.
It knocked me for six. As my mum's used the term, you're a dead man walking. And to be quite truthful, she's correct. They've targeted me. They're closing everything down. The thing that's frustrating is it's unknown why. All I want is to know why, because not once have any of these banks, or I shouldn't say banks, it's just the one, Westpac and St. George, its subsidiary, have never approached me for any sort of issue or compliance problem with transactions in and out of any of my accounts whatsoever. But it did knock me for six. I've now at a point where I'm now comfortable, and I've mellowed out a lot to what I was, because initially I was quite stressed. I didn't know if the business was going to survive. I didn't know if I was going to have to bankrupt myself, liquidate the business, sell everything off that I'd worked so hard for the last 5 years to get established, where we were starting to go places. It was just a kick in the guts that I just didn't expect, and it sent me into a dismal dive.
And how long have you been banking on all kinds of banking with this particular institution and its subsidiaries?
Okay, Westpac. I've held a credit card, private personal credit card with Westpac for approximately maybe 12, 13 years. My personal accounts that I have with St. George, 29 years.
29 years.
And the business accounts with Westpac were transitioned in 2017.
And so they just turn around and can cut you off like that, despite
Yes.
you being a loyal customer for that long.
Yep.
All right, well, I can attest, Paul, that you've been on quite an emotional roller coaster since this happened, and there's been some very bad days, but there's actually been some good days, because there's been some signs of a light at the end of the tunnel at times. And one of the people that has actually stood up to help you here is One Nation Senator Malcolm Roberts and his aide Richard, who's done a great job. So Malcolm Roberts has taken up your case twice now in Senate estimates, which is the twice yearly questioning that the senators get to do of people in different areas of government. And he's taken up your case with APRA. What we want to do now, we're going to play a 6-minute clip of the last Senate estimates hearing a few weeks ago, where Malcolm Roberts raises your case with the chairman of APRA, Wayne Byers, and gets Byers, reminding Byers that he raised you before and has given Byers time to think about it. And you'll see Byers' answer, and at first he's effectively taking the bank's side in it, saying it's the bank's right, but we'll just watch the whole thing and then I'll get your reaction.
Last October, I raised with you the issue of debanking and used the case of Paul Thomas's Cash in Transit Business Commander Security, an AUSTRAC and AML compliant organisation that had their business accounts closed by Westpac and then was refused business banking across the whole banking sector. Wayne Byers, Chair, you promised to look into it. 2 weeks after estimates, Westpac gave notice that they were now closing his personal account with St George Bank, which he'd had for 30 years, a joint account, also closing a joint account he has with a business partner, and ending withdrawal rights he has on a joint mortgage account he has with a relative. Did you look into his case, as you said?
So I think the issue is one in which you have a bank that has been found to not be adhering to its AML responsibilities. The bank has therefore looked very closely at its frameworks, its standards, its controls around detecting and preventing anti-money laundering, and has made some decisions about whether it thinks customers, including probably the case you are referring to, but can be safely banked and allow the bank to satisfy itself that it is meeting its obligations. And they have come to the decision that that is a customer that they don't think they can meet those obligations for.
He's an AML compliant.
Yeah, I can only tell you that's their decision.
So it looks like Westpac really got him well and truly. Now, all banks use the same risk management company. Being debanked by one bank means being debanked by all the banks, even the COBA banks. So what is this man, Paul, supposed to do now? His customers need him to resupply their non-bank ATMs in clubs and pubs. Where is the appeal mechanism in these debanking cases? Who do they turn to? We're seeing a bank competitor here being debanked, wiping out a competitor.
So I'm not sure of your reference, Senator, to all banks use the same risk management company.
Same company that assesses the risk for money laundering and so on.
I think there's more than one, and ultimately it's an individual bank's responsibility. They can't outsource that responsibility. Yes, there are suppliers of systems that help banks do that, but there's more than one. So it is a difficult question, and I don't pretend that there's an easy answer to it. But banks do have their obligations; they have to adhere to them, and they do need to. And it's quite clear there will be significant penalties if they do not.
And APRA has its responsibilities too, because these banks are shutting down whole industries potentially.
Yes, but in this particular case, where we're dealing with a bank that is seeking to comply with the law that's administered by another agency, it's difficult for us to intervene in that issue.
Well, AFCA refused to hear these cases. They don't hear anti-money laundering cases. So I wanted to discuss this issue with AFCA at estimates, but they refused to attend estimates. The concept of anti-money laundering, the concept of being held accountable for their actions was too much for them to handle, apparently. So I repeat my question, what do these businesses and their employees do now?
I don't have an answer to that question, other than to try and seek to understand what are the issues or the nature of the business that has caused the concern.
Could my office contact yours?
Absolutely happy.
When I look through the companies,
Senator Roberts, this will need to be the last question.
When I look through the companies that are being debanked, I see they are competitors of the banks: remittance companies, Bitcoin and digital currency vendors, gold bullion dealers, cash handling companies that supply non-bank ATMs with cash. Why is APRA allowing the banks to increase their market power by debanking their customers?
Well, we're not allowing banks to do, or disallowing banks from doing anything. The issue that is at the heart of this, and as you say, it's not just this particular company, but it's remittance services and other things, is the potential for cash transactions, or transactions, sorry, to be occurring anonymously, and that make it difficult, therefore, for the banks to satisfy their obligations to AUSTRAC, and therefore they have to make a business decision about whether they wish to bear that risk. And in many cases, in the light of the experience of two major banks who've had very large penalties levied on them, clearly they are making sure they are compliant with the law.
Senator
Can I
Roberts.
just add one little follow-on?
Very, very quick.
Thank you, Chair. Even Paul Jeftovic at AUSTRAC has said, don't debank these people in the name of AUSTRAC. If this is in response to AML legislation, why have you not asked Treasury to review that legislation to correct this unintended consequence? And isn't this an unconscionable conduct?
Well, Senator, we can only comment on what's in our purview, and as the Chair has indicated, we don't make directions for banks to have particular customers or not have particular customers, but they do have to adhere to the laws that abide all entities.
Isn't it unconscionable conduct to wipe out a competing industry?
Well,
All right, so Paul, what's happened since that hearing?
Well, where do I start? There's a lot happening behind the scenes with that hearing. I believe there's certain parties have been in contact with Senator Roberts since that hearing. The comments made by Wayne Byers, I don't agree with in relation to the bank's compliance requirements. In respect to my case alone, only for the fact the work that I was doing that I no longer have is being conducted by my competitor, who has a wholesale commercial arrangement with the bank, where the bank stands to earn more out of the transactions that are going through their account than my account.
So let's just be clear on that. Compliance means the bank's concerned that the area of business you're in could be a risk to their compliance with the law. But as you point out, well, they're doing the same business with other people that are your competitors, but you know, because of the arrangement the bank has with those competitors, they get a bigger cut from them than they get from you.
Correct. They get to have a facility that with reserves that are held at their depots, whereas I have to facilitate my requirements through a branch network. So ultimately, it costs the bank more money with me having to use a branch network, whereas they earn more money from our competitor with the funds going through their facilities.
Now, I still want to talk more about the upshot of this hearing, but just on what you just said, you were given advice, I believe from the RBA or somebody, that you could get your own facility with the RBA to be able to continue conducting your business, I believe. But then when you explored that, ultimately it came down to only the big four banks get that kind of direct access to the RBA.
Sort of, yes. When I made the inquiries with the RBA, they came back to me and said, because I'm a cash in transit provider, I have the capabilities of being able to work with a bank to be able to establish that setup, that wholesale commercial arrangement setup. However, to achieve it, one of the four banks must sponsor you.
And that's where it comes undone.
That's exactly where it comes undone. And that legislation changed, according to the representative from the RBA, about 10 years ago, where it was put into the hands of the banks. Whereas prior to that, I believe, from my interpretation of what he was implying, was that it was the discretion of the RBA to sponsor and set companies up with that commercial wholesale arrangement.
So the big four banks have a monopoly in this area. But back to what you were saying earlier, given that Wayne Byers is so clearly wrong in what he said to Malcolm Roberts there about your case, because your case cannot be a compliance case, we are now getting to an interesting possibility in your particular case that while the general point about banks targeting people in the non-banking sphere is true, in your case there may actually be unfair competitive practices that the banks are involved in with your competitors. And I believe some of these competitors in the past have tried to buy you out, right?
One of them, yes, following a meeting that I had with one of the representatives of Westpac. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. I was approached via LinkedIn through messages.
Yep.
It was just the fact that a couple of years later, another security company, which I won't mention their name, but they're based here in New South Wales, had similar meetings as I did with the representative from Westpac in respect to wholesale commercial opportunities. And subsequently, that representative vanished like he did with me, only to then have a week and a half, 2 weeks, within a week and a half, 2 weeks, a knock on the door from a current sponsored commercial wholesale arrangement, approaching the managing director of that company, approaching them saying, would you like to sell your business? And it rang alarm bells when I heard that story. So I went back through my correspondence, and it was the same week that I tried to reconnect with the Westpac representative that I got approached. So and then I thought, I put two and two together, thinking this smells like a fishy sort of situation.
So this gets into a very murky area, and of course this is we're talking about potentially real breaches of the law and competition law and potentially those kinds of things, which I'm sure there's lots of small businesses around Australia, if they're watching this, would be thinking, well, yeah, we've had our own versions of that kind of experience. But Paul, you're now taking legal action against Westpac. Just describe how that's going.
Very slow. Look, I'm going day by day with the whole process. It's the only way that I can. Like you said, and you described, it's an emotional roller coaster that I'm riding. Where the hearing date that's set for us is the 29th of this month, where we should have some sort of answer as to what the story is. Like we are suing them for unfair contract terms.
Yep.
I can't go into many specifics of the case because I don't want to jeopardise the process. But we are progressing quite nicely with everything, and the evidence that we've managed to get together is quite substantial.
Does it feel like David versus Goliath?
It does. It does. I'm now on it. I've spent nearly $60,000-$70,000 of money that could I afford it? No, but I'm doing it out of principle's sake now because I've done nothing wrong. I've done nothing illegal. If I've undertaken unsatisfactory conduct or if I've partaken in any illegal activities, I wouldn't be sitting here having this interview with you right now.
Yeah.
I'd be in a 4x4 cell. My business would be closed. My security license is revoked. I'm a justice of the peace. That would have been revoked.
Yep.
Business firearms, all confiscated. So where are the authorities if I've done unsatisfactory conduct? They're not here because there is no such thing.
Yep. But just, just a statement of reality in this area of law, unfortunately, because it is David versus Goliath. The good side of that is David won in the David versus Goliath, so you've always got to have hope. But the other side of it, we know the history of the big four banks in Australia, and they can just wait people out. And because if it's already cost you $70,000, you don't have bottomless pockets.
No.
And what the banks, you would have been one of the statistics if this happened to you before the Banking Royal Commission, and at a certain point that those cases got so numerous that there was overwhelming demand. We've got to have a Royal Commission. But 2 years later, they've got away with murder, right? They know they've dodged a bullet, but they don't care. And by their behaviour, there's very little sign they've actually learnt any lessons in terms of the way they treat customers, business customers, etc. But the fact that you've even taken up this fight, though, Paul, is very important. It's why in a press release we put out about you, we said you're fighting back in the war on cash because so few people actually do fight back. You're up against a giant monopoly here with the big four banks, an oligopoly, and yeah, they like to crush their the people who take them on. However, you're doing it in a context now, and in that context, you know, we're having political victories, etc. And the things that, when you do fight like you are, you at least get to identify the kind of behaviours that are being used against you, etc. So that even if it may not bear fruit in your case, it helps add to the general understanding of how bad the banks are, and that can contribute to a political solution. So that's a little bit long-winded, but I just wanted to end on a political note, because I know in this whole time that you've been having this discussion, that you've kept raising to me a recurring theme. So what have you concluded is the long-term solution to this problem of the private banking monopoly abusing its power like this?
The Australia Postal Bank, to bring fairness back to the Australian people and to bring these bastards back into line.
Yep. A postal bank, just to give you some of the details, a postal bank that we advocate and we've got legislation for, because it's a publicly owned entity, will not be allowed to discriminate. It cannot just turn around and debank customers. That would not be allowed. It's not a private banking decision, it's a service. So straight away, this could never happen. If the private banks want to act this way, people like Paul would just be able to go straight to the postal bank and set up operations there. The postal bank would also be committed to keeping the cash payment system alive. And we know in the case of what the reforms Christine Holgate, who is a campaign we're fighting at the moment, the reforms she did, the banking reforms she did for the post offices, part of those reforms was supporting the cash payment system, right? So it would be a lawful step to go from that to a postal bank that actually kept the cash payment system permanently alive. And the big banks can do what they like to cash. No, they wouldn't be able to kill it because the postal banking system would keep it alive. And so a system like that, just, you know, you can see why you would be attracted to it, Paul, based on your experience.
Yeah, no, 100%. I would jump there in a heartbeat. And it would actually probably help me grow the business again. And like a lot of my customers are whilst I've got loyal customers and they're sticking by me, a lot of them are wondering what's going to happen outside of whatever the outcome is with our legal case.
Yeah.
Like I say to them, I'm just taking a hiatus. Just wait for the postal bank and I'll be back. Okay,
good. Well, on that optimistic note, Paul, thanks for joining us. And thanks for speaking out. You know, like I said, the fact you've fought back in the war on cash is really, really valuable. It helps to unmask the beast that we're up against in this banking monopoly. So thank you very much for doing that. You have our full support. We're more than happy to publicise the way your fight is going. We'll include a link below that people can click on and go to your specific page about this where you have more details, etc. Right? And yeah, people, please follow Paul's case. Help other people follow Paul's case. Share this video because this is very important. Paul's case will resonate with a lot of Australians, whether they're concerned about the power of banks, whether they're concerned about the cash, the war on cash that's going on, whether banks are aggressively taking down ATMs all over the place, shutting down branches all over the place, etc. We see that sort of thing happen. You feel powerless. We're fighting it politically. Paul's someone who, at a personal level, because it's happened to his business, has decided to fight it in the legal system, and he deserves all the support he can get. So thanks for doing that, Paul. We'll monitor the fight as it goes. Thanks for your support for us, because that's been instrumental in helping us to win the campaigns like the cash ban. And let's hope that sometime in the not too distant future, you and I and everyone in the Citizens Party will be celebrating a postal bank.
Exactly right. Looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks, mate.
No worries. Thank you.